This is Stacy from 2 Weeks in a Hammock with part 3 of the series, Remembering Crescent, with authors Billy and Karen Rosa. We began by walking toward Crescent on the North Main Loop Trail, headed south. Now turning to the west, we will continue toward Lake Michigan. Today I will show you locations around Crescent, on the trails nearby, and north to the Davenport Lumber Camp area. Crescent was a lumber town on the west side of North Manitou Island, now in the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. It was active from 1907 to 1915. Billy's grandmother Esther lived here as a child. Billy's great-grandfather, A.J. White, ran the sawmill in the village. Now in wilderness, there is little evidence of the once bustling lumber town. Billy and Karen have compiled many family photos and fascinating history into the book, Remembering Crescent, Logging and Life on North Manitou Island. Join us while we look around.
Can you imagine being over on that island in the ice and snow, and it was nice in the summertime, and the wind that would come up, and what all went on, and back in the day. If you can imagine from the time they got there, and the dock was partly built, kind of thing, and we're living in a house that was built. We're building a mill, and we're doing stuff, and we're feeding 200 to 300 people. And we've got animals, we've got there, and of course the big fields that they talk about over towards Swanson's there, I think. Of course they appreciate all the stuff that they had to grow for all the animals, and the amount of animals that they had to have to feed them, and the horses, and the crew in one picture, or a couple pictures, I'm sure those were the people with the curry combs. You can see them sitting there to groom horses. That was all people that took care of the animals, and in the grounds, the fields and all of that, let alone the people that cut the timber, and loaded stuff on the rail cars, and unloaded it, and sawed it, and handled all the lumber, put it in the pile, and stuck it up out in the pile, loaded it again, put it out on the dock, loaded it again on the boat. Talk about labor intensified. If you can imagine how many times, if they'd had fingerprints or DNA on all that lumber that got to Chicago and wherever it went, why, they would have drove them nuts trying to sort it out who belonged to what. And to think that all this went on, and there's nothing but the wind blowing, and the waves are rolling a little bit, and the sand's blowing, and I can walk up on top and see where stuff had to be, and there's nothing but grass and trees and stuff that's growing up that would have been bare, even back in 27 like we seen, and to think that all this went on, and it's hard to imagine. You just can't hardly fathom. But the more we went, then I knew that I had to find what I was looking for. And I kind of knew where I need to look a little bit with stuff, and I think you'll find that we did find the place where the house was.
Walking just a little bit off the bluff, there is the mill pond. There are a couple of nesting birds here that don't want us any closer. Looking to the south right now, over in that direction, is the Swanson's barn. You can see here there are some kind of elongated shapes here, possibly in the water, on the water edge, possibly the remnants of the built area of the mill pond. We know that this is the mill pond. And beyond the mill site, there was evidence of the main road and other foundations. When we returned with the Rosas a few months later, Billy was able to identify the site of the house his grandmother lived in, and the sawmill, and the log skidway.
All the time that they were there was 250, 300 people that worked with the mill, worked with the logging, worked with all the animals, everything that consisted of everything that it took to make that operation run. And ultimately, they got a locomotive. They had 2 locomotives there, so they had about 6 miles of railroad track and logging cars. And in the wintertime, they used sleighs, but they used a lot of big wheels. In the summertime, getting logs to the rail. Because mind you, it was on the beach, and they were like I say, 5-6 miles of rail, and so that's how that went with getting the logs there.
We are now at the Davenport Brothers Logging Camp, a remote site about 2 miles to the north of the village of Crescent. Right now I'm walking on the main trail. This is the northern loop, and I'm walking to the east. This area was once a hub of activity with convenient access to the forests on the north end of the island from here. Logs were transported by horse-pulled sleighs to this area, and also big wheels, and from this area they were transported to the mill by train. The main trail on the map is called the Old Grade, as it was once narrow gauge train tracks. As seen in the earlier photos, cuts were made through the hills to keep the correct grade for the tracks. The Shea locomotives, Manitou Limited number 1 and number 3, were used on the island. I'm stepping off the trail toward the south, and this is a flat area that was part of the camps. And I'm getting to a higher vantage point so I can show you the angle of one of the historic photos. And I'm looking toward the west, across the opening, and now toward the north. And you can see the trail. And here is what the lumber camp looked like over 100 years ago. And when you compare it to the landscape you can see that we're in the same location. So now I'm walking back up toward the main trail. And there's some rocks along what would have been the edge of the tracks. And this area is full of morrell mushrooms. We were here in May, which is the time the mushrooms come out, and there were so many mushrooms in this area, right next to the trail. Now I'm going to walk over into the flat area from the photograph where the buildings were. And we've got a couple of old apple trees here. And as we walk through this area, there are a lot of depressions in the ground. There's artifacts, old metal artifacts laying around. And here is one of the depressions in the ground. And some stones near it. There are various rock piles and stone configurations throughout this area that would have been placed there as things were built. When you look through the woods at a location like this, you have to imagine all of the smaller trees gone. And look at the landscape, look at the shape of the land, look at the large old trees, and that will reveal clues as to what went on here in the past and what it would have looked like. I'm coming up on some metal artifacts, not unusual. A lot of the site locations on North Manitou that are listed on the map have these kind of things laying around there. If you take the time to walk around and look, remember that these artifacts are protected and that you should not disturb them. Seeing another depression in the ground. Also seeing some ramps. The onions, the short, green, bushy looking little plants. Some more artifacts on the ground. Another old tree. And this is a rock pile here. And this looks like an old stove that's been propped up on this tree. this area has some trails, some old roadways that lead up to a higher area, which would have been access to the northern woods from here. And there's deer bones, also not unusual to see. There's quite a few deer on the island, which is why this looks so open. Looking back toward the open area. So Davenport Camp is a name on the map on the north loop of the main trail, and this site is often just a pass-through for hikers. Taking the time to slow down and walk around reveals a lot about the site. When you pay close attention to the shape of the land and the trees, you can imagine the way it was used more than 100 years ago. This is an area that looks kind of like a ditch not too far from the main trail, and it's got a bunch of cans, metal debris in it. It looks like it was like a dumping spot off the edge of the main flat area where the buildings were. If you've enjoyed this tour of the sites on North Manitou Island, please check out parts 1 and 2 of this video series, Remembering Crescent, with Billy and Karen Rosa. Also, look for other content on my YouTube channel with other videos for North Manitou Island. Stepping back out to the main trail again. Here's the trail, and thank you so much for coming on this walk with me.